Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you to joining us for our webinar. You are joining us for Juggling While the House is on Fire, Managing Multiple and Changing Priorities. Our keynote speaker this evening is Brenda Robinson, who you can see spotlighted in a video. I'm going to go through some housekeeping, some disclosures, and some further information, and then I'm going to turn things over to Brenda to start her talk right at 7 p.m. I would like to kick off this evening with a land acknowledgement. The Alberta College of Family Physicians would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 territory, and all of the people here are beneficiaries of these peace and friendship treaties. Alberta encompasses the traditional territories of many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and Nakota Sioux peoples, who have called this area home for many generations. The learning objectives for this activity. What we hope at the conclusion of this activity is that all participants will be able to outline 10 key strategies for addressing changing priorities in a challenging time of change, describe some of the challenges we may face in our new normal during and after a pandemic, identify tips to maximize energy for improved performance in difficult settings, and apply strategies for maintaining a positive perspective in challenging times. Our speaker bio, a little bit about Brenda Robinson. Brenda is a speaker, trainer, writer, and consultant. She is the founder and president of the Robcan Group. Her Bachelor of Arts was earned at Brandon University and her Master's of Education at Simon Fraser University. She's been addressing groups for over 30 years about communications, humor, laughter, positive working skills, and wellness in general. Her workshops and presentations are in high demand. A key factor about why we invited Brenda here tonight is that Brenda believes that we are on a lifelong learning journey and it should be enriching, exciting, interesting, and above all, fun. So a disclosure from Brenda is that Brenda has received an honorarium for this presentation from the Alberta College of Family Physicians. It's also important to note that Brenda is a professional paid speaker who completes speaking engagements on behalf and for various nonprofit and for-profit organizations. Again, she has disclosed her role as president of the Robcan Group, which is a speakers organization. The voice that you're hearing now is Carrie McNabb. So I'm going to disclose that myself and another moderator we have on here today is Mary Lee Vaughn. We are both paid employees of the Alberta College of Family Physicians. Disclosure of financial support. This program does receive financial support from the Alberta College of Family Physicians, and we did receive a grant from the College of Family Physicians of Canada. All right, so the ACFP Check-In and Check-Up webinar series was developed and curated by our virtual education committee. So we have a committee of family physicians who have worked to put together these virtual education offerings. This slide explains a little bit about the processes that we follow to make sure we comply with Maine Pro Plus certification guidelines. So a big shout out to our virtual education committee to thank them for their time and investment in putting together these CPD opportunities for our members. All right, just a couple of housekeeping notes. I would like everyone to know that this webinar is being recorded, so you can revisit it after the fact for any key tips that you might miss, and also that we can share it on our ACFP website for anyone who's not able to attend tonight. Brenda will be taking questions from the audience tonight, and since we're using Zoom webinar, there is a Q&A section and not just the chat log. So we encourage you to use the chat log for comments, discussing things with your colleagues as we go. But if you have any questions that are specifically for Brenda, please ensure to put them in the Q&A section. At the end of this, you will also receive an evaluation and a short summary document of the strategies learned tonight. This will be sent out via email tomorrow, and we will send it to the email address you used to register for this session. So please watch for those emails going out tomorrow.
Yeah, I consider this truly a privilege to be able to speak to you. And I have to be honest, somebody put a comment on already that they like the topic. the juggling while the house is on fire. Little help for that from Carrie and from the committee, I think. And it really is. It is about juggling, and it is about balancing, because what I'm finding is that in this challenging era, it is part of what we have to do. And I'm just going to make a couple of comments first and see where you come from on this. I think that many of us, when we find ourselves in challenging and difficult change environments, as we're in right now, and when we find ourselves there, I think sometimes we start to think, oh, there's so much pressure, there's so many expectations, there's so much to do. In fact, I was commenting to Carrie earlier that some of the social psychologists are actually saying that we are the busiest that people have ever been in the history of studying the social psychology of people in our social structures. And so being this busy, I think, does put us on the spot. I don't mind telling you that in the province of Alberta, and I've lived here now for 50 some years, in the province of Alberta, we are probably, they say, in our 28th year of do more with less. And it's an interesting phrase. And I think that for a period of time, it was almost an expectation that we would do more, we would do more, we would get more done, we would work longer, we would work harder. But I think we've reached a point where we are realizing that indeed, maybe we've topped out on do more with less. And maybe what we need to start to think about now is not doing more, but doing differently in order to address some of the challenges that we're facing. And so I've put together this little presentation on managing multiple and changing priorities, because I do think it has become about managing. And I think that some of the things that are happening to us are putting us under the kind of pressure where it does feel like we're not so much managing, we're just kind of coping. Or I said to somebody the other day, it almost feels like we're surviving rather than striving. And I think that you are in the kind of profession, the kind of field, and I think that you probably are the kinds of folks who indeed, you're not about just coping. I think it really is about doing differently in order to get better results. So I'm going to challenge your thinking a little bit, and I'm going to ask you about some of the messaging that I believe that we have had that challenges us around juggling when the house feels like it's on fire. And I don't know if you had some of this messaging, but I know I certainly did. I had a mother who used to tell me, if you start something, finish it. It's a very interesting phrase, and it probably is a good way to achieve outcomes and to feel productive. But I think we live in a world today where very often we start things, and before we finish them, they've changed. And so it's not about starting and work till we get to the finish. It is constantly about starting and then adjusting or adapting to what's happening. In fact, one of the things that we're finding, and I'm sure that you are too, one size does not fit all when we talk about priority management, or we talk about stress management, or we talk about time management. It's not about having the formula. I think it really is about finding what fits for you. And so although I say one size does not fit all, I think we all need to fit into something that leaves us feeling that we're managing. And so there's a little bit of a theory now, and you've probably heard it. In fact, some of us has bantered it around. There's a little bit of a theory that instead of working harder, we need to work smarter. And people say, well, what does that really mean? And it's a very good question, because there's really no definition for it. But when we keep working harder and harder and harder, and we're not feeling like we're keeping up, catching up, getting ahead, then we have to challenge ourselves to say, well, is working harder really the answer? In fact, I like a quote from Dr. Ken Blanchard, who says, we have entered an era of inverse change. We will never catch up again. And that needs to be something we can feel comfortable with and perhaps even enjoy. But that was not the messaging that many of us received. If you start something, you finish it. If you do it right the first time, you won't have to do it again. When you start something, keep working, keep following through until you're finished. That kind of message sort of flies in the face of, we may not catch up again. And so I'm starting to think about things and think about things differently. And because I like to use examples or little stories to give you an example, I want to give you a little example of my learning about perhaps needing to work smarter, not harder. And I actually learned it from one of my daughters. And it was a very interesting experience. A number of years ago, I live in Sherwood Park, Alberta. A number of years ago, my husband made arrangements for health reasons to winter in Victoria. And it was a wonderful thing for him and wonderful for me, because with him in Victoria, I was able to slip out there once a month, and it was like having a little holiday and spending 3 or 4 days in Victoria. So we worked out all of the details and we had it all figured out. And it seemed to be the best thing to do. However, there were some challenges attached to it, and some of those challenges were my own and my own thinking. Like many people in many relationships and many situations, there were things that I looked after and things that he looked after. And although I felt very strongly that spending the winter in Victoria was the very best thing for it, I had my own personal worry. And we often have our own personal worries around getting things done. All of the years that we've been together, one of the things that my husband always looked after was snow shoveling, which was a very good thing because I struggle a little bit with a lower back. So shoveling snow was not really the best thing for me. So he's always shoveled the snow. And although he had certain little health issues, didn't affect his snow shoveling. However, he, like many other people, and I'm sure some of you are in the audience, had a way to shovel the snow. In fact, we had a way that we liked the snow shoveled, and we maintained that. We like the snow shoveled right down to the bare pavement on the driveway, and we like it thrown to the right because that's the way we've always done it. And you know, all of a sudden I realized, whoa, I'm faced with an extra task. I'm going to have to get a task done that I haven't been getting done. And so how will I manage that? And so my daughter, who lived in Edmonton at the time, came out to Sherwood Park and she said, Mom, Dad's going to be away for the winter. And I thought, yes, Captain Obvious, we discussed that. And so I said, Dad's going to be away for the winter. And she said, so I'm wondering, Mom, how are you going to get the snow shoveled? I said, well, I don't know. I said, I don't think I'm going to do it myself. So I think I'll have to hire somebody to shovel the snow. And she said, no, Mom. She said, you don't have to hire anybody. She said, I'm going to be your snow shoveler. Well, I'm socially skilled and I think I'm a intuitive kind of person. And so I knew enough to be grateful. And I said, oh, Jill, that's my daughter's name, Jill. I said, that is so nice of you to offer. I said, I was worrying about how I was going to get the snow shoveled. She said, I knew you would be. And she said, I don't want you to shovel the snow. And so she said, I'm going to be the snow shoveler. And I said, well, thank you so much for that, dear. And she said, and because I know you so well, Mom, I think I'll just take the shovel home. And I said, now, why would you take the shovel home? However, I'm going to give you a little background onto why she would take the shovel home, is because she probably knew that in my mind, when she said she's going to be the snow shoveler, I was happy to have the task done. The question was it going to be done the way we'd always done it? And as a matter of fact, was I going to, after she had shoveled the snow, go out and perhaps finish it or put finishing touches on it? So I think she was worried about me because I come from, and maybe some of you do too, I'll ask you to think about this. I come from a generation known as the I generation. We're not selfish. Don't think of the I generation as selfish. That's the me generation. The I generation are actually people who take just a tremendous amount of responsibility and work really hard and get a lot of things done. And so if you've been impacted by the I generation, you may have said or heard some of these things. Have you ever said or heard, if you want it done right, you'll have to do it yourself? Or have you ever said or heard, if I don't do it, nobody will? Or perhaps you've said or heard, by the time I show them how to do it, I could have it done. And then you may even be guilty yourself, or you've heard others say, why is it always all of the same people doing all of the work all of the time? And you know, my daughter knows that that's where I come from. And she said to me, I'm going to take the shovel home, Mom, because she said, if I'm not here the minute you want that snow shoveled, I know you, Mom. You'll go out and shovel that snow yourself. And she said, I don't want you to do that because then your back's going to be sore and we'll have to listen to you whine and complain. And she said, so I'm just going to take the shovel home, and this will work better if we work together on it. Well, I have to tell you, it hadn't snowed, so I'm typical Albertan, I think. I didn't really worry all that much because it hadn't snowed, and she took the shovel home, and I thought, oh, she'll bring it back. And then I went to Toronto, and I admit to, when I went to Toronto, I had heard that there was a forecast for snow. And I was in Toronto for about 3 days. When I flew back into the airport, I could see that it had been snowing. I thought perhaps it had been snowing all day, maybe even the day before. And I have to tell you, even though I had worked out how I was going to get that snow shoveling done, because of my background in managing things, I had a little trouble trusting. So as a matter of fact, I don't mind telling you that when I got off the airplane, my biggest worry was not, in fact, I actually Googled the road conditions and checked to see if they'd been on the highway. I'm fine with driving home. I'm fine with getting home. My biggest worry was, will she be there? Will the driveway be shoveled? Will it be shoveled the way I want it shoveled? Will it be finished? And you know, I had to really talk to myself because I almost had myself convinced that no, she wouldn't be there. And that's a worry, of course, because what if I drive home and she hasn't arrived to shovel the snow and I don't have a shovel? I got myself so worried about how I was going to get that task done that I almost stopped at Canadian Tire for a shovel. But I said, no, 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 things have changed. We can't manage things the way we've always managed things. And we have to work with others to get the results that we want. So this is what I said to myself. I said, go home. And when you go home, if she's not there, then you can go and get a shovel. And I drove home, worried all the way, by the way. And when I came around the corner, and I still remember, not only was she was there shoveling. And she had already shoveled the sidewalks. We live on a big old lot. She had shoveled the path up to the step. She had shoveled the step. And she had shoveled half of the driveway. All those years, we never built a garage, but we had this long driveway that went right up past the house. And the front step was about halfway up the driveway. And she was at the front step, standing there with the shovel. And my goodness, I have to tell you, not only had she had shoveled it correctly. She had shoveled right down to the bare pavement, and she had thrown it to the right. And I drove in on the shoveled part of the driveway, and I got out, and I know the right things to say. And I said, oh, Jill, thank you so much for coming. And I remember she said, you worried that I wouldn't be here. I said, no, no, I knew you'd be here. And she said, liar, liar, pants on fire, Mom. I know you worried. And you know, she's right. And I said, okay, I did worry a little bit. I wondered if you'd be here. And I said, but look, not only are you here, you have already shoveled the paths, the sidewalks, the step, and you are half finished the driveway. And this is when I started to learn about priorities and a different approach to managing priorities. Because my daughter said to me, I know, Mom, she said, you don't need the whole driveway. I only shoveled half the driveway, and that's all we're going to do now. And I have to tell you, I was absolutely taken aback because in my mind, I was thinking, when you start something, finish it. If you're going to do a job, do it well. If you do it right the first time, you won't have to do it again. All of that old messaging about how to get things done came back to my mind. And I stood there, and I'm sure I looked like a deer in the headlights. And I said, Jill, I don't know if I can live in a house with a half-finished driveway. And she said, Mom, I'll make it easier for you. I'll take the shovel home. And I looked at her. I couldn't believe it. And I said, Jill, your dad and I have shoveled this whole driveway for 35 years. She said, I know, Mom. We think you're nuts. We cannot figure out why you continue to do something that no longer needs to be done. Did I like it? Oh, not a bit. In fact, I tried one more. I said, Jill, what will the neighbors think if I don't shovel the whole driveway? And she said to me, hopefully they'll take our modeling and follow it. She said, some of these folks shovel far more than they have to. It's an interesting question. Are we actually spending good time, important time, doing things that maybe aren't as important as they once were? And she left with my shovel. And you know, I have to tell you folks, I hardly knew what to do. I stood there and I thought, I don't know. I don't know if I can live this way in a half-finished driveway. And my neighbor came out. My neighbor, we've been neighbors for years and years. He came over and he said, what's going on over here? He said, I thought Jill was shoveling the driveway. I said, she is, and she's finished. He said, no. He said, she only shoveled half the driveway. I said, I know. But I said, she explained it to me because Jill had explained to me that when we built that driveway, we had 3 cars. I now only have 1 car. I don't need the whole driveway. She'd also explained to me, and she's an occupational therapist, and she said, besides, Mom, it's not really safe for you. She said, when you park way up at the end of the driveway, then you have to make your way back along that car, and it's icy and it's not safe, she said. And I want you parked back here where you are safe to get out of the car and go into the house. I explained this to my neighbor, and he said, I don't think so. He said, when you start something, you should finish it. And you know, it took me, and I tell people I'm not gonna let myself off the hook here. It took me about 3 weeks to realize that indeed, right, she had a good point. Why would I be spending time and making it a priority to do something that no longer needs to be done? And so I want you to think about that little story, because we can learn from so many people what it is that really are the priorities in the work that we do and the way we work with people. And once we've decided on the priorities, and I don't know, folks, I'll just take a little bend in the road here and say to you, I'm not sure how you determine your priorities. I remember when I first started teaching, managing time, managing priorities, I used to say to people, make a list of things to do. Okay? And then when you're done those things on your list, cross them off, I would say, so that you'll know how much you've accomplished. You'll know when you're finished, I said, when all of the items on your list are crossed off. And you know, it was a wonderful era. And I tell people that. I actually think there was an era where we could actually get all of the things done that needed to be done. However, a few years ago, I changed my approach because I really believe that what I was making was wish lists. I was making lists of the things that I wish I could get done. And by making a list out of them, I was making them priorities. As a matter of fact, I became so attached to my list of things to do that if I did something that wasn't on the list, I would actually add it to the list so that I could cross it off. Because I realized that getting things done was actually more important than doing important things. And I started to change the way I approach managing priorities. And so I still make a list of things to do. However, when I make that list today, I look at those things, and one of the things that I ask myself first is there anything on here that really doesn't need to be done, or that I'm not going to get done today, so I should take it off the list? Because I sometimes think that the stress of juggling all of the things that we think we need to do is actually what places us in that position of not being able to feel like we are productive. So I encourage people in today's world to make work lists, not wish lists. And I think we have to decide what are really our priorities. And I don't think I have to address you with what your priorities are, because I believe that you know them. My question would be, are we really focusing on getting the important things done? Or are we still trying to do everything? And I think that we've all been guilty of cherishing that feeling of I'm caught up, or I got it all done, or I had a list and I crossed them all off. And I don't want to take that away from you completely. But I really think that when I get the 2 or 3 or 4 priority things done on my list, then that's when I know that I've been productive. So I don't think, I quoted Ken Blanchard, and I say it in a different way. I actually say to people, I don't think that we will ever get it all done. So I'm going to make sure that what I get done are the important things. And I'm also going to make sure that I'm not doing things that are unimportant, because I think sometimes we spend too much time there. I'll quote another writer, Dr. Tom Peters, who was sort of a theorist on organizing. As a matter of fact, he created a beautiful saying for us. Some of you may remember the saying, everything in its place and a place for everything. And he really wanted us to be organized. And the underlying message in all of his writing was that if you're organized, if you've got a system, if you've got a way to do things, if you've got a calendar, if you've got a date book, if you've got those organizational tools in place, then you will get things done that need to be done. I fear sometimes that we've become too organized, that indeed sometimes our organization actually takes more time than the results that we want to achieve. I'm just going to tease some of you. Apparently, in the 70s, if anybody can still remember the 70s, we actually built houses to be organized. The very first thing inside any house built in the 70s was a coat rack. And you were supposed to hang the coats in the coat rack. Below the coat rack was a place for the boots. And did you know that Canadian social psychologist Roger Malott actually says that the phrase that most Canadian parents said most often to their children in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was not "I love you," it was "hang up your coat." Because we were pretty sure that if we could just get everybody organized, that indeed then we would be caught up. However, any of you who have raised children or are parenting right now, you know that you can say it. You can have the place for it. But does it actually happen? And then what do we do when it doesn't happen? And so we get ourselves into this mode of being organized. And I think being organized is a wonderful thing. I do think that in some ways we got carried away. I came out of the generation, I call myself, I'm from the Tupperware generation. Oh my God, we love Tupperware. Little plastic containers with lids that we could put everything in, and then we could get a labeler and we could label them. Oh, we love to be organized. As a matter of fact, I came from the era where they created cutlery containers. Do you have one in your home? A container where the big spoon goes in the big spoon hole and the little spoon goes in the little spoon hole. And I always ask, how much time do you think we spent? Don't say invested. How much time do you think we spent moving spoons? Because indeed, sometimes our organizational systems actually cause us to spend more time in order to try to feel that we are managing the system. I'm not telling you to be disorganized. I'm not telling you that just throw all organization aside. I do think that we need to be organized. But I think sometimes we have to ask ourselves, am I spending too much time on the organization and not enough time on getting the benefits of that? And so if you are one of those people who has to be totally organized, you may want to ask yourself a few questions about how much time we spend on the organization. Technology has been a challenge for all of us. We have become, in fact, I'll quote Roger Malott, Canadians, he says, are absolutely the best at storage. Retrieval is our problem. We can put it away, we can store it, we can label it, we can name it, but can we find it again? And he always asks the question, how much time is spent finding things that we thought? In fact, I'm going to tease some of you. Have you ever said, I'll put it away where I'll know where it is? And how much time do you spend finding where you know it is? And so I'm always challenging people to say, perhaps being organized should be how we address our priorities, not one of our priorities. And I think it is a real challenge to do that. I think that we got to the point where being organized was so critical that we couldn't think beyond the organization to, was it actually getting us the results that we wanted? And so I try to get people to think about, what is it in your lives that you organize? Now, I think we need to be well organized at work. We're very professional people. And I think that we really want to be able to be sure that we are well organized. However, when we look at that organization, is it working for us? Or is it stressing us sometimes? Because I think it might be. And in fact, sometimes in our desire to be organized, we actually turn into, I don't know if you've heard this term or not, task hoppers, where we jump from one thing to another because our organization actually reminds us of other things. I won't give you a professional example because we're all from very different backgrounds in terms of organizing, but I will give you a personal home example. Sometimes I get up in the morning and I'm ready to take on this house, and I'm going to get it organized. And so I go into my room, and because I had a mother who encouraged it, I make my bed in the morning. However, just before I went to make the bed, I realized, oh, I really should start the laundry. And so I picked up the laundry and I headed downstairs. To get to my laundry room, you have to go past my freezer. On the way past the freezer, I thought, oh, I meant to take the meat out for dinner. And so I put the laundry down and I got the meat out and I went up and I put it in the microwave, and the phone rang and somebody asked for something, and I went and looked that up. And then I got back to them. You know, it turned around to be about 11 o'clock and the bed wasn't made and the laundry wasn't started and the meat was sitting on the counter. And you know, I think about that and I think that's because everything I did prompted me to do something else. And so sometimes I think that in task hopping, we don't get any finishes. And I think that we have to get finishes. Because people talk to me a lot about it and they say, well, I'm always being interrupted, always being interrupted. I don't know of anybody today who's not being interrupted. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that it is part of the expectation that we have of each other, is that I can interrupt you. In fact, I was laughing the other day. I do a presentation on new generations. And I said, we now have a generation of children who interrupt. And as a matter of fact, children are so important to us that when they interrupt, we stop and listen. And so I think about it and I think, do I really want to stop the interruptions, or do I just want to manage the interruptions? And I think that sometimes interruptions seem to keep us from getting to our priorities because we allow that interruption to break our pattern and we move into task hopping. When we have work lists and I have a few things on my work list and somebody interrupts me, it's fairly easy for me to say, you know, I do want to handle that and I will look after it. I just need to spend another 15 minutes with this person and then I'll be able to talk to you about that. And we can actually begin the juggling, the working through. However, I think that if we resent the interruption, it then becomes negative and gets in the way of actually managing priorities. I think that all of us have energy systems that we have to use and use effectively. People have times when they work best. We have times when we're more productive. I'm so pleased that you joined me in an evening session, but for many people, the evening is not the time when when they feel at their highest energy or best energy. I think we need to know when we work best, but we can't use it as an excuse. Because in today's world, especially this world that we're entering post-COVID, I think that things are going to change enough that we will have to work differently. I don't think we can do more with less. I think we have to work differently and better together. So one of the things that I'm suggesting as a strategy, and it's a thought for you, is that we think about how to get the best results by focusing on priorities and by communicating with priorities. I think that email has become, I'm going to say it to you, I think that email has invaded in terms of interruptions, in terms of priorities. We're so busy with our new communication. And I think we have to find a way to balance that and get best results. On the other hand, I would never say, and I won't say, that we could live without it, because we have actually reached a point where we need that almost instant communication, the back and forth communication. However, it doesn't mean that when an email comes in, I stop everything and respond to it. It does mean, however, that it gives me a measure or an arrow with which to respond. However, here's a little statistic that might surprise you a bit. Did you know that some of the research, Globe and Mail actually did some of this research, they found that people are actually only reading 1/3 of the emails they receive. And here's an interesting thought for you. When they open an email, they often only read 1/3 of that email. And it can therefore be a huge time waster and cause us to be task hoppers all in one form. I'm going to ask a question. Have you ever sent an email with 3 questions in it? And the person to whom you sent the email responded and answered the first question. It has caused us to actually rethink how we communicate, and particularly how we communicate by email. In fact, there's a new sort of little strategy out for writing emails, and you'll laugh. And if you've ever been to IKEA, you'll chuckle good, because it's called the IKEA approach. And it suggests that when you're sending an email, you clearly set priorities for the person who's reading the email. So I would send an email that says, there are 3 questions for you. Question 1, question 2, and question 3. And according to the research, when we send that email, people will answer all 3 questions. So when we say, how are things changing? I think because people are so busy, we actually have to change the way we engage them in order to get best results and be able to not only manage our own priorities, but help them understand the priorities of our messaging. So when you think about it, and you think about these strategies, it is a little bit different. Now, there's been great concern, and I was sharing with Carrie, and I'm doing a lot of workshops today about what's it going to be like when everybody comes back to work. And it always makes me laugh when we say back to work, because we've all been working. I know you've been working. We've all been working. We're not going back to work. We may be going back to a workplace or a work environment. And people are saying to me, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be busier? Is it going to be busier than ever? And this is why I think that these kinds of discussions are really important, because I do think it's going to be different. I don't think different necessarily means it's going to be difficult, because I believe that one of the ways we're going to manage the change is by looking carefully at priorities, focusing on what's important, doing first things first, getting things done in good order, maybe letting ourselves not be so perfect. Maybe some of us will actually be able to let go of some of the things that have been getting in our way in terms of feeling that we're managing effectively. And you know, it's a really tough one, because I think sometimes some of the habits that we've developed in our workplaces actually get in the way. And I'm just going to give you a quick little example, and you can laugh with me or you can laugh at the situation, whatever feels comfortable for you. But I saw a situation not that long ago, just before the COVID thing, where I was actually watching somebody who was incredibly busy, and I mean incredibly busy. And so I was sitting waiting for an interview in this very busy hub office. And as I waited, I was watching her. And it was fascinating to me because she was so busy. She could word process at a rate that I could only imagine. As a matter of fact, not only could she word process at an incredible speed, she could actually answer the phone and continue to word process, which for me would be an impossibility. I don't multitask that well. And so as she was word processing and answering the phone, people were coming in and she was providing direction, and she was handling paper and people were delivering things and she was getting them to the right people. And she was just, when I think of multitasking, watching her, it really struck me, wow. And you know, I have sat in offices, and maybe some of them have been your type of office, where I have watched people in the hub of those offices just be incredibly busy. And I like to watch the confidence with which people manage this kind of busy. So watching her was a real joy. However, something happened, and it really hit me that all it takes to get us off our path of priority thinking is maybe something that's a little out or a little different. So I'm laughing a little bit because what happened was this. She stopped dead. I called it keyboard paralysis. She stopped. And all of a sudden she was looking around. It was kind of like that owl look. And she was looking around the office, and she was really tense. And I said, oh, what happened? And she looked at me and she said, I don't believe it. Somebody has taken my stapler. Well, you know, in the scale of priorities, I hadn't really put staplers really high, but I realized that for her, this was the trigger that was throwing her off, getting all. I said, what do you mean somebody's taken your stapler? And she said, well, somebody has taken my stapler. I have my name on my stapler. And you know, it takes me back to that I generation thinking, because I do believe that in the I generation, we not only felt that if you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. I think we also felt that we had to have our own stuff, our own way of doing things, our own little territory to work in. I always laugh when I say this because I go into my sister's kitchen. My sister's same generation as me. And she has a big sign in her kitchen. You may have seen these signs. Her sign says, Karen's Kitchen. It's a very interesting sign. And I put a sign under her sign that said, beware if the bear is in her den. Because I will tell you that in Karen's Kitchen, you have to do things the way Karen does them. But you know, she has said to me a number of times, it's hard to get good help. Or nobody seems to help around here. Or I end up doing everything. And so when I'm there, I always try to help. However, what I've learned is that when I put things away, if I don't put them where she wants them, then it is Karen's kitchen. And so I struggle because here I am in an office where somebody's lost their stapler and it has absolutely shut her down. As a matter of fact, she did shut down. She said to me, excuse me, I am going to get my stapler. And I said, oh, okay. And so she put her phone on call forward. She shut her screen down. I understand that. She had a little sign that she put up that said back in a few minutes. And she actually headed down the hallway holding the piece of paper that needed to be stapled. And I'm watching this. And I thought, oh, well, she must know where it is. But I was wrong. She actually was on a mission to find her stapler. And so I thought, well, how does this impact her overall productivity? Because I'm interested in this. And so when people mark out their territory, when they put their name on things when they have to have their own stuff in order to work. I kind of worry about that. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to time her. So I actually timed her because I'm interested in managing and working with time. And I had a watch on, I timed her. I stood up and I watched her, and she searched for her stapler for 11 minutes. In that 11 minutes, she interrupted 17 people to say, "Excuse me, have you seen my stapler?" To some of them, she said, "I think Rod took my stapler." Some of them agreed that Rod has taken their stapler. And I'm not sure what's happening here, but I don't think it's positive team building. And so I'm watching her and thinking, wow, this is quite a difficult journey for her. And I was fascinated because about 5 minutes into the search, 3 other people joined her in the search. We now have 4 people searching for her stapler. And I was thinking, wow, this is quite an investment, or is it an expenditure of time? This is quite an investment of time. 4 people searching for a stapler. So she came back to her desk, still carrying a piece of paper that hadn't been stapled. And so I couldn't resist. I said to her, "Oh," I said, "you didn't find a stapler." She said, "That's right. I couldn't find my stapler. I think Rod took my stapler." I don't like Rod. But, I laughed and I said, "Didn't anybody else have a stapler?" Very interesting answer if you think about investing rather than spending time. She said, "I don't care if anybody else has a stapler. I want my stapler. I have my name on my stapler." And then she put that piece of paper down and she said, "This will sit here until I find my stapler." And I thought about it and I thought, that's what happens to us. When organization becomes the priority, then we lose sight of what the priorities really are. I got called in for the interview. I have to tell you, though, it impacted her attitude. She went to work with a bit of attitude. And so when I got called in, she said, "They're ready for you." And I thought, oh, and I said, "Well, where do I go?" And she said, "Just go down to the end, turn left, look for an open door." That wasn't the person who was working before she felt out of control. And so I went in for the interview. I was probably gone 45 minutes. And when I came back out, it was fascinating to me because the 4 people were standing around her desk, including her. And as I walked by, one of the young men said, "I don't know how they ever expect us to catch up around here." He said, "We've been going flat out. We've been doing nothing but work. And it feels like we're further behind." And so I share that little story with you, not because I think you have your name on your stapler, although we never know, but because I do think that sometimes we actually allow our desire to be organized, to have things our way, to work in the territory that we are in the way that we want to work in it. And I think we lose sight of what are the priorities. And so when you think about managing multiple and changing priorities, that's what I ask people to think about. How do you set your priorities? I use a simple little system that I learned from a man named Alan Lakin, wrote a book called Time of Your Life. My little system is just ABC. And it goes like this. A's are things that must be done today. If I don't get my A's done today, it's going to impact me negatively. It's going to impact others negatively. It's going to impact my clients or my customers, patients negatively. So A's are things that I must get done today. And quite frankly, the items on my calendar in an appointment, those are A's because they must be done today. B's are things that have a deadline coming up. And so some of the reporting that I have to do and the filing and documentation that I have to do, they have to be done. They're important, but they're not as important as the A's. And so A's are things that must be done today. B's are things that need to be done, but not today. And then there's another little category that I think sometimes I have to really fight myself on, and it's those C's. I still remember, I laugh about this, but when I was in university, I used to tell myself that I would actually be able to study better once I cleaned up the kitchen. There was no truth in it. But cleaning up the kitchen was a C, And I allowed it to be my way to procrastinate from doing the actual A. And so I often think about the way I work and the things that I do in A, B, and C. Quite frankly, you're an A this evening. I'm not going to do anything else while I'm doing that. And so I have put all of the other things aside. There may be B's that still have to be done before this day is over, and I will get them done when they need to be done, not this day. And so ABC works for me. You need to find something that works for you. But it keeps me from task hopping, helps me manage interruptions, helps me know what my priorities are and how to set them. And then I can make absolutely certain that I am investing my time in priorities rather than spending my time on other things. And so I think that we all live and work in a world where we have to figure out how to balance these things. And so I will pull it all together with a little parallel, perhaps, or a little metaphor to help you understand balance. Back to my sister's kitchen, okay? And if you don't mind going back to my sister's kitchen with you, I will say to you that although many things that I would like to help her with, I don't, because sometimes I do them wrong. For example, we were putting lunch away one day and I put the mustard in the fridge and she said, Brenda, the mustard goes on the third shelf. I said, Karen, the mustard goes in the fridge. She said, I like it on the third shelf. I don't know what got into me, but I put it in the door. And you know, I came back an hour later and it was on the third shelf. And I had to ask, is she investing in priorities or spending time on her system of organization? And so she does let me. There's one task that she lets me do, and I tell you about it. She allows me to make coffee because I'm very good at making coffee. We love our coffee, and we love to have a coffee together. So I'm making coffee, and while I'm making coffee, I dug around in her freezer, and I found some butter tarts. And we were going to have a little tea party. And so I called her. I had the coffee ready, had the butter tarts ready, and I went to get the cups. And when I looked in her cupboard, I will tell you, her cupboard was a picture of organization. All of the cups were hanging in a row, all facing the same direction. And as a matter of fact, she's a farm woman, so I don't mind telling you this. Her cups were actually organized in sections. There were 4-H cups in one section. There were co-op cups in another section, Viterra cups in another section, because she had them all organized. And I looked at the system of organization and something struck me and I thought, where will I get 2 cups? So I took one from the 4-H section, one from the co-op section, and then I don't know what got into me, but I just turned 3 around backwards. And I called her. Actually, then I have to add, I left the cupboard doors open. Another no-no. I called her and I said, Karen, come and have a cup of coffee with me. She came into the kitchen. She stopped dead. And she said, did you mess with my cups? I had to admit I did. I said, I did. I said, but you know what? I was just playing around. And when we're finished having coffee, I will wash these 2 cups. I will put them back where they belong. And I will fix those other 3 cups. She couldn't do it. She couldn't sit down and have coffee with me until she had fixed those other 3 cups. And you know, when she sat down, I said to her, Karen, what is more important to you, your sister or your coffee cups? And she hesitated. She said, my sister, when she leaves my coffee cups alone. Well, you know, folks, I don't know if we can have it both ways.
Brenda, that's the perfect segue to a question in the chat, actually. I've got 2 very different questions, but I think they're really excellent. Is it okay if I dive in with one, knowing that we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'd really like to get to the second question as well.
Yes.
So a question that we have, someone is mentioning the term deep work. So as doctors, they really need to find time, and fee-for-service environments, it's really often hard for them to take time for deep thought or thinking. Do you have any strategies for doing deep work in a time of change? that
I
question.
don't know if it's a strategy, but I have a thought that I've been sharing with people, and I'll share it with you. I don't think we can do that kind of thinking when we're busy, busy, busy doing C activities, unimportant activities. I'm going to say this to you, and you may not like it, but I'm going to say it to you anything. I think we have to actually plan some time for thought, plan some time for strategy, plan some time for thinking ahead. Some people would even call it visioning, and I don't know if I want to go that far, but I think that very often we don't plan any time for that. And if we don't set time aside today and make it a priority, it won't ever happen. Now, I would agree that on many days it's not an A, but it certainly is a B priority because we need to do it. I don't know if that actually answers, but I'm going to say to you that I don't think you'll get time for it if you don't plan time for it.
Thank you, Brenda. Our next conversation that we have is from another doc. She says, how can we encourage our clinical environments and teams to be mindful of us multitasking as family doctors? I frequently get interrupted by my staff as I am reviewing results, for example. This could also be a safety issue as it delays my attention. My priority and others' priorities may not match. I'm sure that's very similar to others.
Well, and it is a very complex question. However, I think that quite often we're not clear with people about when we can be interrupted and when we will entertain questions or challenges. I think that we have, and maybe some people would tell you it's a social psychology change, maybe we have allowed ourselves to be too open to the interruption. I know some people who actually set time aside and they say, you know, when I'm working with so-and-so, or when I have a client, or when I'm in an interview, or when I'm doing this, or when I'm doing that, please allow me 15 minutes before there will be any interruptions. That does two things. One is it gives the staff who are working with you some time frame around when you can be interrupted. Two, it gives you some guideline for getting the priority things done before the interruption occurs. You're not alone in dealing with that, but I know it must be very difficult for you because you're in a world where everybody thinks their crisis is the only crisis. Have I said that well?
I think the main struggle that our docs are often having, though, is that a lot of these interruptions are immediate patient concerns. And so as family physicians, they're not in a position where they can say no to a lot of those interruptions. So I think maybe a helpful strategy is to maybe share how someone can maybe get back on track quicker after the interruptions if they can't be avoided.
Actually, it's a very good question. And one of the things that I often ask people is when we are faced with those kinds of interruptions, rather than saying no, which we are very uncomfortable saying, we're not good at saying, don't interrupt, or I can't be interrupted. But one of the things that we can sometimes do is give a very realistic time frame. I will be able to deal with that in 5 minutes. I will be able to address that as soon as it's almost like we have to turn people down with an alternative rather than stopping the interruption. There is no stopping interruptions. I said that to you earlier. So we do have to learn to manage them. But I think that sometimes we allow ourselves to be too quick to respond to every interruption and treat every interruption with the same degree of urgency. I don't pretend to know your business as well as you do, but I do think that there are varying perceptions of urgency that we have to communicate about. Does that help?
I think that does. I think that definitely relates to a lot of what our docs are feeling.
Okay.
In the last 4 minutes we have together, I'm monitoring the chat for any new questions that
Oh my, yes.
A quick note, if someone had mentioned, how do we set parameters in an effective way to protect our time?
Well, first of all, we have to set parameters, not only with attention to what has to happen, but with our intention to provide the very best service or to provide the very best results. A little saying that you can apply to that: we have to pay attention to our intention. I'm not setting parameters to be difficult. I'm setting parameters to allow us to work together to get the very best results. And I think when we preface a parameter with a reason, with a why, I think that it's much more acceptable to people than just I can't, or I won't, or I don't. In fact, I will say to you that most of us really want to do only our very best. But in order to do our very best, we often have to set boundaries and parameters. Not an easy thing to do, but when you express your intention for the parameter as well as the parameter itself, gives people a much deeper understanding of where it comes from. Any other questions? We can open the window. I always say the door, but we're opening the window because we're on Windows these days.
Excellent. I believe I've answered all the ones that are in the chat log. Actually, if you could, what is one sentence that you would give us as a takeaway message?
One sentence. I would say, working harder is not the answer. I believe that we can't keep working harder. We need to work differently, and to a certain degree, I think we need to work smarter, because balance only occurs when we balance people and things. And it isn't just, we shouldn't be measuring our success. I'm into a full paragraph here, but we shouldn't be measuring our success by how many things we got done. We should be measuring our success by how many of the important things we accomplished today.
Thank you, Brenda. In the last minute that we have here, what would you wrap up for everyone?
I would say to you that I really believe that we have to plan time to do the things that are priorities, but we have to sometimes make things a priority in order to plan for them. I thought your question about having time for some strategy, some visioning, some thinking, some deep thinking was just an excellent question. And I think we're so busy planning for things, we don't plan to make things better.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brenda. We really appreciate your time and insight tonight. For everyone who's on the call with us, Brenda has actually outlined her 10 strategies, and we're going to include them to you via email in the evaluations that will come out tomorrow morning. So that will be in summary form to you guys tomorrow morning to kind of piece together what we talked about here tonight.
And I want to add my personal thank you. Wow, the time just went fast. And my hope is that you'll go away with a few ideas, a few little gems, words that make sense to you, and be able to actually apply them. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you and good night. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you to everyone who is able to sign on tonight. I hope you took away some key pieces that were valuable to you. Thank you for attending another ACFP Check-in and Check-up webinar. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.